Hello everybody, we're talking about Mustadio and Gaffgarion today, whether or not these are units that you should be building. In the case of Mustadio, you'd actually have to pull for him, which is pretty hard to recommend as he is an MR unit with some significant weaknesses. However, he also has some really cool strengths, and obviously there's a lot of Final Fantasy Tactics fans out there. Now with Gaffgarion, it's a little bit easier because you get him for free, you can max him for free fairly easily, so it's really a case of do you want to spend all of your awakening mats on him or not. And we'll go into both units upgrades and a bit about their kits, and that way you can make a decision. Let's start off with Mustadio, who is a MR unit. He's limited and you can only get him on the banners. I didn't even see him as a coin pity unit in the shops. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my Mustadio. I've got him the first time around and I decided that I would EX him. It was pretty easy because I had a lot of MR Mind Spheres that I could grab in the Mind Sphere shop. So if you do already have him, chances are you can actually build him for free. So that is a big thing to do. So he gets some upgrades, but before we look at that real quick, if you don't even have him yet, you know, what is he? He is a ranged unit. He mostly has, gunner attacks out of that straight line, but then he also has the ranger sub that we can see here and thief sub for some agility and mobility. And he gets a TMR, which is just it's an all right TMR. It's got a good accuracy if you wanted to build it with trust stones. It gives a minus 40 evasion rate on hit for normal attacks, but the rule of thumb is that you don't want your units normal attacking. You want them to be doing their skills as much as possible. So when we go ahead and we look at his master ability 2, we can pull it up here. He gets a lot of really cool stuff, and I actually have the number version on my left monitor here. So he gets an Earth ally, HP up. He gets stop resistance 25, which is actually quite interesting with Agrius coming back into play, and that is going to be important for other units in the future as well. But also, he already had the accuracy, and he already had the chance to immobilize Disable Blind. Those are old news. But the Earth and HP up and the stop resistance, that's new. The range up by 1 is also new, and then the reaction rate decrease is also new. So solid upgrades. We would have loved to see some sort of defense penetration or some sort of missile resistance penetration here, but we did not get those. However, he does get some upgrades to his skills. So when we take a look at the upgrade Safeguard, which was a AoE buff, is now Safeguard Plus. The biggest thing that you need to know here is that everybody's getting an accuracy buff, but also he gets range now. So the +1 range is a big deal. He doesn't have to go, outside of kit with a TMR for that. He has it on his own kit now. That's a really good buff to have to keep him as far back as possible. He also gets a quick shot enhancement. This is going to lower target's evasion rate, and then it does 3 hits. So it's a really good PvE skill. It's also just good for chaining, and then, your Earth units come in and do big damage after that. But being able to reduce the evasion rate of a evade unit could actually have some applications. This is a straight line shot, of course, so if somebody's in the way, they're going to get hit by it. And then finally, when he gets to the max level here, he gets this power shot piercing. This is important because when he uses it, he gets 30% missile resistance piercing, and then he does medium damage. It also is a piercing skill, so when you look at this, if you hit someone at the top of that thing, it's going to hit everybody that's in that line. So that's really solid, of course. The AP cost isn't too high. I wish it was a large damage skill, like that's kind of a bummer, but the fact of the matter here is that he doesn't have any other missile resist penetration, so this is going to be one of the most important skills on his kit. So if we want to talk about Mustadio and his pros and cons, I'll say right now that just like Y'shtola, he is an MR unit that has comparable to a UR stat line, and the exception to that is that he has very, very low HP, just like Y'shtola has very, very low HP. He also doesn't have very good resistances. He's basically going to die super quickly, but it is good to know that he's got, for a ranged unit, he's got an appropriate attack level. He's got high luck, he's got high dexterity, all those types of things, decent agility. Those are all really good. So we also have a unit that has reflex. That's a really big deal. He is able to inflict some status effects that could really affect the outcome of matches, and he has a high chance to apply those. They're all on straight line shots though, so that is something to consider. They're also on his sub job, which means you can't use sub ranger. That's not the biggest deal right now, but ranger gets a bunch of upgrades. in the future, and you actually will probably want to use that Ranger sub. He also has that PvE potential that we talked about if you want to use his 3-hit moves, if you want to use all of those status effects, because status effects are often a part of PvE fights. And then he just has super high accuracy, so always good to have units like that. The biggest weakness is that he's going to not do very much damage. You have to really augment him with some trust stones to get him some defense penetration. Maybe he has the ninja garb on, and then he also has, trust stones for missile resist penetration and, defense penetration. I mean, not all of those are going to stack however you set up your, your loadout, because you also have the diamond code, of course, if you've done that raid. But he'll also, need just more boosts to his missile attack, to his earth attack, whatever you want to do to power him up a little bit. He is going to be a weaker unit. He's not meant to be a carry. He's meant to, deal damage to help finish people off and then apply some status effects as well. So if you want to talk about cons, we kind of already mentioned that he has, this limited power, defense penetration, missile resist penetration. And the other weakness is just that he's a gunner, right? And those straight line shots are harder to use on auto than a ranger unit that has those arcing shots. It really is the toughest part to figure out with this kit. He does have a way to decrease his chance to be targeted. So it doesn't, even though he is a very weak unit that can get one-shotted, so are a lot of ranged units. So it's a weakness, but it's also, it's pretty par for the course for ranged units. So really the big question is he going to contribute enough on offense to your team to warrant a spot? With all that said, if I had to give people advice on whether or not to be pulling for him, it'd be a big no from me, because it's a very difficult unit to recommend when there's no clear path to getting him. He's an MR unit, and while he will be a very fun unit that will contribute in PvE and also probably have some pretty fun times in PvP, he's not going to be a necessary unit for any sort of meta. Even in limited guild battle, you're probably going to be running, like we just saw, less VCs to have better units. That doesn't mean we're not going to see him. It just means that when you have to make these difficult choices, he's a pretty easy skip. Now, if you are a fan of Final Fantasy Tactics, if you're a fan of him, do whatever it takes to make yourself happy so you don't have regrets. But I personally wouldn't recommend chasing him. If you're going for a different tactics unit and you get him along the way, that's awesome, and congratulations. But otherwise, I wouldn't just go pulling for him. All right, so next up is Gaffgarion, and we all get him for free. He has this sword, which was a really big deal back in the day. If you didn't play at the beginning of the game, this was huge because we did normal attack a lot more at the beginning of the game, and especially tanks. Tanks weren't meant to be using skills every turn because they just didn't generate that much AP, and you had the situation where they would normal attack, and if they could put confusion on someone, that was a really big deal. So even before trust stones, this sword was a staple for any sort of tank unit. If you want to include trust stones, it's actually got a pretty good base attack power to use. At the end of the day, it's nothing too special, but again, could still be a decent sword to use on tanks, although we have a lot of different trust options and a lot of very good swords in the game. A lot of tanks don't even use weapons at this point anyway. So otherwise, with Gaffgarion, he gets some upgrades, which we'll take a look at again. First of all, we're going to take a look at his master ability, and he got some upgrades here. So initially, he already had the initial AP up by 10. He already had the crit damage 25%, which at the beginning of the game was an insane amount of crit damage modifier, but we just didn't have that many ways to raise our crit. Now we have a lot more, ways to interact with that with VCs and other, espers and stuff. So now he gets crit rate 15, which is a big deal. He also gets, when he's higher than 70% HP, he gets a bunch of defense and spirit, and that is pretty interesting because he has skills that will heal himself. So I think that if you want to build him, you have to find a way to make it so that first hit doesn't one-shot him, and then he has a chance to use a self-heal skill to go back up above 70%. Then he can attack again, he can get hit again. He doesn't die, but he can heal back up to 70%, get that 25 defense spirit again. The problem with that is that he has super low HP, just like our other limited MRs, and he also has just terrible resistances, except for slash resistance, which he has 25%. Now, he also gives your dark allies 10% HP and 25% sleep resistance. That's new as well. So there's actually a really interesting character here, but I feel like they they just didn't do him enough service by not giving him very much HP. It would have been cool to see him get more HP, but you know, whatever. At least we can try some interesting crit rate builds. You know, he can reach some pretty high levels of damage. He does not have defense penetration, and he has limited slash attack penetration, so those are kind of issues too. But you know, let's take a look at his skill upgrades next. All right, so we can go up to the upgrades here. Deception gets a upgrade that is pretty cool because you get 40% attack. You also get 40% slash attack increase. Those are really big modifier slash stat boosts on top of already getting Maneater. So when you put together all of these modifiers, when you put together crit damage 25% plus crit rate up if you build them for critical hits, he has the potential, and he can reach really high levels of attack to do some serious damage if he can penetrate slash, you know, resistance and defense. So it's pretty cool, an MR unit that can do a lot of damage. He also gets Shadow Blade enhancement. This is a big deal because it gives him a slash resist piercing rate of 30% for 3 turns. So that's a pretty big deal. However, if we go and we find Shadow Blade on the board here, it is down at the bottom here, the range is really limited, and this is where they kind of messed up because it's only a 3 range. It only has a range height 1, and he needs to get this online to get his slash resistance piercing rate up. Unfortunately, what he's more likely to use is this new skill, which is Abyssal Blade Dark. Now, this is a really cool skill because it has this nice big AoE, so this can actually hit 1, 2, 3 and then 4 spaces away because of the tip of the AoE, and this is going to do a 25 defense break to all the targets. So a big AoE defense break, and then it absorbs 30% of the damage that you deal, and he can deal a lot of damage. So he doesn't have any defense penetration, but he can break defense like Orlando, and that is good for PvE. Obviously it's still good for PvP. What we're looking at here is that when he's approaching people, he's likely to use Abyssal Blade here, but he's also likely to use his regular Abyssal Blade, which has a similar range or same range as well. Those will put people into range sooner than his Drain Blade will, and it's going to be tough. You might have to turn this skill off, even though it is one of his biggest damage skills. This one also will be interesting because you don't actually want to lose too much HP with him. Let me check this real quick. If I go into the War of the Visions calc and I look at Abyssal Blade, it consumes 25% of his HP, so that isn't going to put him at his, you know, below 70%, but it might be a skill that you actually turn off. That way he has a better chance of using his slash resist penetration and then also Abyssal Blade up here. This skill has 3 uses, which is also kind of a bummer. I wish that was maybe, you know, a little bit better. What are you going to do? He's not really a guild battle candidate anyway. He's more of an arena candidate when you can really pick your matchups. So 3 uses is actually pretty good for arena. All right, to summarize the pros and cons of Gaffgarion. So again, he has a stat line that is similar to a lot of URs in terms of attack and his other stats. The exception here is that he has low agility and he has very low HP. So that is definitely a little bit of a concern, but he has that high damage potential. The crit damage modifier is a really big deal if you can get a crit build going for him. He also has that AoE defense break, which I think will come in handy in a lot of things, especially for new players that need to set up their first ever, you know, PvE teams. And then there's that initial starting AP, which is a nice little boost for him. Maybe you can build him on a TP AP rune set, and then he can focus on using a powerful TMR that's not an AP TMR. For example, you know, I'm very intrigued about using the Kane's helmet with him because the Dragon's Pride buff will give him haste and also 1 move. That's important because his agility is lower, so for him to get 1 more move to get into range of people with his lower range skills and then to be able to use haste to go faster, those are really big buffs for him. So I think that's kind of what I'd be looking at. And then for cons, you know, the low HP, the terrible resistances except for slash, the fact that he has low agility, he's a short range unit with low mobility and unless you put that Kane's TMR or another movement TMR on him. He has no courage or re-raise, which you really need as a glass cannon. And then he has that no defense penetration on his kit, but a little bit of slash resist penetration. I think something that would have been really cool with Gaffgarion would be to maybe give him that new Abyssal Blade. It steals courage from people, or it steals re-raise from people. I think that would have been a really neat way to make him a cool unit. I don't think it would have made him broken, but not just to dispel one of those revival effects from somebody, but actually put it onto himself. What a cool way, like what a cool skill that would have been for him, and would have added a very unique application of him in various game modes. So if you're wondering if you should be building Gaffgarion, I think that there are some conditions that would make it more interesting or more worth your time. So for example, if you're a brand new player, to get a unit at 120 that can do stuff in PvE and PvP, that is definitely worth it. Everybody can take him to 99 fairly easily and then get his Vermilion TMR here. But if you actually want to spend your blossoms on him, I think that you have to know that he's not going to be, this crazy PvP unit, that he's going to be more of a fun unit. He's going to be more for PvE stages, for selection quest stuff, and he'll do his job well in those circumstances, but he's not going to be like carrying you in PvP. So don't get your hopes up unless you're in like a doing arena and you really map your out against like slash teams. Then there's probably a good niche for him there. But it's really a matter of, do you want to spend awakening materials on him, or would you rather save those for somebody else? Now, of course, once you get all of his mind spheres, which are really easy to acquire, then you can actually just wait. Right? Maybe 2 months from now, you decide, I'm gonna upgrade him, because he is cost 50, which is nice. He's not a cost 60 or 65 or anything. So he is a low cost unit. He might come in handy in some low cost content or selection quests and stuff. So the option's always going to be there. I'm obviously I've 120'd him. I'm just leveling him up right now. So I think he's good enough to play around with, but he's not like a spectacular unit in any way. So what do you think? Was I off the mark, or was I on the ball with these reviews? I think I was pretty fair to both of them. It's pretty hard to recommend pulling from Mustadio, and Gaffgarion is what he is. However, you can see that I've raised both these units to have the cap of 120. So I am going to be using both of these units. I'm going to put them into arena teams and hopefully highlight what their strengths are, so that if you're interested in seeing them and maybe that will help your decision, then you can look forward to those videos. Otherwise, we'll be doing some videos this week coming up about whatever the news reveals for our next banner, our next event, etc. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.